Hi everybody, and welcome to the 403rd episode of Vassals of Kingsgrave, and the 47th part of our insanely long linear Song of Ice and Fire reread. Today we're going to cover the events of the 1st and 2nd of December 299. We're midway through A Storm of Swords, and the chapters we're covering are John 3, John 4, and Jamie 6. My name's Bina007, and today I'm also joined by Adam.
Also known as DrownedSnow on the podcast of Ice and Fire forums.
By Alexi.
Czar Alexi on the forums.
By Sarah.
Lady Weaver on the forums.
And by Alix.
Aiwendil on the forums.
Thanks for joining, everyone. And just to remind you all that we will be discussing potentially spoilers from all of A Song of Ice and Fire and potentially TWOW preview chapters, but we won't be covering Game of Thrones stuff, just in case any of you are not watching that. So, in the last episode, we left Jamie having supper with Roose Bolton and Dany deciding to stay in Meereen in her final chapter in A Storm of Swords. This episode, we pick up the action with Jon at the wall. We jump back a massive 45 chapters, which is always the way when we have Dany involved. But the action takes place just one day later on December the 1st, and I believe it is Adam with the chapter summary.
Yeah, so John 3, we open up with Jon headed off with the Wildlings, but they're going to climb the wall or cross the wall somehow, and he can't take Ghost with him, so he just kind of says, hey, go back home, and just kind of hopes Ghost will go home. Doesn't really know if that's going to work or not. So we get a lot of George's awkward sex writing in this chapter. Which I think is probably the key thing to take from this. Jon invents oral sex, and in between
the Lord's kiss.
The Lord's kiss, yeah, and even Ygritte, who likes to neg him during sex by telling him how he doesn't know anything, was impressed because it was something she didn't know. Yeah, so in between we get, Jon talking to the Wildlings and them kind of questioning him about, things on the other side of the wall, and we get a few stories, from Ygritte, but mostly we get it sandwiched between two large bits of awkward sex writing from George. So, and we do find out a little bit more about Ygritte, talks to Jon about having stolen her, and he's still very conflicted over his vows, even though they've had sex like 50 times. He keeps getting really mad, telling himself that, I had to do it the one time, but, I'll never again. And they did it 3 more times that night. So, I would expect out of anyone his age who has finally discovered sex. But the poor guy is just filled with all of the shame of the North, I guess. Hits him right in the vows. So, it's a fun chapter.
It is. I do like the way that every time he feels guilty about having sex, he then feels guilty about breaking his vows, and then feels guilty about how easy and how not guilty he feels about breaking his vows. He just
about
tortures
how good
himself.
It feels to break his vows.
Exactly. Just enjoy the sex, man.
He's not even enjoying it. I mean, I'm sure he's enjoying it, but come on, man.
Oh, he's really enjoying it. He's just not enjoying the fact that he's enjoying it.
There's time to give yourself shit when it's all done, Poor guy. I mean, never joined the watch.
Yeah.
You sound like you didn't like the sex writing. I thought it was quite realistic, not in terms of how he writes sex, but how he writes conflicted emotions after sex. I thought that was quite good.
Oh yeah. I just mean, in a lot of novels you would have the descriptions of sex and it would be a lot more condensed. And here George goes into explicit detail, and I just kind of it's fine, I guess, but it always kind of takes me out of it because I imagine George sitting around writing it, and it's just weird. It
raises a good topic, actually, for the rest of you, or all of you. Do you prefer when someone fades to black or when someone does attempt to write sex? Because I always find it a bit annoying when people don't do it. But then again, like you say, so few people do it well. It just seems kind of unrealistic. You're covering death and guts and gore and rape and pillage. But when 2 people actually just like each other and want to have sex, you're not going to cover that.
I think it's better to actually write it, but it's just that George's writing is always very awkward.
Exactly. So it reminds me of his descriptions of food. I feel like he writes these scenes one after the other. He writes the big food porn scenes, and he's like, oh yeah, I gotta go. That makes me want to write something about Jon and Ygritte.
Oh dear. I remember at the time just being so relieved when he finally had sex in the scene with Sam. I was like, yes, you go for it, boy.
Oh, also, I guess it's worth noting that Jon does what he's done kind of the whole time with the Wildlings, and he mostly just tells them the truth about what they ask. But he also feels it's my duty to be we have 300 men at Eastwatch, and fucking bullshit. You don't have 300 men at Eastwatch.
That was hilarious. They just called him on
Yeah.
it so quickly. He's such a bad liar.
Well, but he can easily play it off as like, well, I was at Castle Black, so that's what I was told.
Yeah, but not when they know you're squiring for the Lord Commander. Of all the kind of minions who might not know anything, the one who is going to probably know the full strength is Jon, and they know that full well.
It's like, unless he's counting all the men that got killed on their ranging. It's like, yeah, I'm definitely doing that.
If anything, you'd also expect whoever your maester is to know their full number as well, because they'd be reading all of the messages and writing a lot of them too. Apart from the fact that maester
troop numbers are kind of important, so especially to the Lord Commander.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're going on a ranging, yeah. So, but I don't know. They don't really need his info. Like, that's not why they're bringing him, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think he does help him with knowing that the patrols are really infrequent and like you never really know when and where there are going to be patrols, and they're trying to figure out where's the safest spot to cross. And I think the wildlings have very little information on the watch apart from the rangers that they encounter beyond the wall. They have really no way of knowing how many men are in each castle and how many castles are manned, because for all these years the watch has been exaggerating their numbers. So,
well, and the mundane things like the fact that like they're not really patrolling that much on the other side.
Yeah, and that they're kind of letting everything fall into decay.
Yeah, because they do cross the wall from time to time, right? But if it goes well, they never run into the watch.
Yeah, and one guy can easily hide, but how many are there in this group? About 20 or 30 men.
I think it's right around there. Yeah,
that's a lot of people to be climbing a bare face of ice.
You mean
Super
the total
giant
number
wall.
of troops that the Thens and the Raiders brought?
Yeah, Thens plus Raiders.
It was meant to be about 120 because the Thens supposedly took about 100, and then the Raiders had 12, and then you had the extra people that weren't included in Giles' Raiders.
Yeah, okay. That's a very large
I thought it was
party.
a lot less than that, but I guess that makes sense. But yeah, all those people climbing the wall at once, and then they know the basic stuff like from Mance, like how there are no walls at Castle Black and things like that are kind of important.
Yeah, but Mance hasn't been with the watch for a long time now, so it doesn't have, like the...
But I mean, that's the whole plan really, is to get over, and then they can get to Castle Black from the other side, because it's much easier to deal with, and especially they know that there's probably not a lot of people there. But even if there were, again, like they have no walls, there's really no defense, unlike in the show.
So, alt history. What would have happened had Jon actually killed Mance? Would it have made any difference to the story, really?
Jon would be dead.
Yeah, Jon would be dead.
Yeah.
Okay.
The prophecy wouldn't work out, I guess, probably. I don't know. There's no one around to bring him on. Or maybe he just turned into a white and be like zombie Jon.
Yeah, that'd be so fucking awesome.
The wildlings would still march for the wall, but they would still be like, they would probably have a lot more infighting if Mance had died.
Well, and we see later that, I mean, the wildling army, as it looks to him, is huge, but most of it's not really the fighting army. It's all the people. It's a whole nation of people kind of moving. So the fact that there are so many different leaders and it all kind of falls apart pretty quickly, I don't know. I think a lot of them would splinter off like they did.
And of course, with no Mance infiltrating, you don't get the pink letter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Don't even get Theon escaping from Winterfell.
Oh, you mean you think the pink letter is Mance? Is that what you're saying?
Isn't that what we think?
It's one of the theories.
It's one. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we spent so much time on that. Like, every theory is about 80% plausible. So.
Okay, we can get to that when we get to that.
Yeah.
My other question is there a significance to the story of Gorn's Way and the tunnels beneath the wall? It just reminded me a bit of Moria, but the idea that these people could get lost down there and just be lost to history. But there are so many
children are roaming around.
Yeah, there are so many cool like wall magics theories, and we can get into a bit with the next Jon chapter. But the idea that there's I don't know.
Is it something like, because we see the tunnels under the wall that are clearly like placed there? Is it something that maybe these people they'd heard about that, or they knew and they're trying to find that, or like these are kind of the people that created all those? Or, I mean, because it seems like it was built into the wall partly.
Do you mean the tunnel under one of the one that Bran goes through, which has the weirwood door?
Yeah.
Do you mean that tunnel? I think that one was probably put there by the the Men of the Night's Watch and the Children of the Forest and Brand the Builder. But I think the rest of the tunnels are probably ones that the Wildlings have done or tried to tunnel through.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is I think there's probably several of those that were kind of like designed into it by the Watch of the Children. And I'm wondering if maybe the Wildlings they have some knowledge of that, but they don't necessarily know how to find them. So they either are trying to find them or just are like, well, we can do the same thing. I don't know. I guess it seems like a good idea, but the wall is like, how thick is it? It's much taller than it is thick.
Yeah, but
it's not thick.
I think it says you can have 4 horses abreast or something along the top of the wall, so the base is probably a lot larger.
Yeah.
I mean, you go through the base of the wall, and it's like going through a tunnel. It's that thick, right? I mean,
yeah.
There's like 3 gates at Castle Black throughout the whole inside of the wall.
Yeah, they need some dynamite.
Oh man, more like gunpowder.
Some wildfire.
Or wildfire. Yeah.
I'd like melt it and it all crack and the ice would expand.
If they want to get through, it doesn't really matter if the wall's still up, so they can bring the whole wall down with wildfire. Oh yeah, with Gorn's Way, what do you guys think about Gendal's children and Arson Isaac's men too? And do you think they're going to come back into play later on in the story as either whites or people fighting whites?
Yeah, I would hope so.
I hope so too, because George brought back the rat cook, so I'm hoping that he brings them back too.
The wall is made of people.
That was such a great line. Such a great line.
And matching with that, you have Ygritte's line about the wall being made of blood as well. So people definitely all throughout the base of it, hopefully. That's what I'm hoping.
Just frozen.
How crazy would that be?
In the middle.
Like if we get the horn and the wall breaks open and it's like, oh, there's like reinforcements inside, trapped inside. Like,
but which side would they be on? Are they still people or are they whites?
I assume they're all dead or undead. Cold Hands is kind of the exception, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, guys, could you imagine if they weren't actually dead and they get revived, so it's like cryogenically frozen? Yeah.
It's me, Brandon the Builder.
Disney's back.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Walt Disney.
Sorry. But that'd be so funny.
The other question I had is it unrealistic? I don't know anything about this shit, but, he says that he's had sex with Ygritte 50 times already. Young, fertile, not on any kind of birth control as far as we know. It's unrealistic that she hasn't fallen pregnant by now.
Maybe she's barren.
Well, but I mean, how long? When was the? Because it wasn't that much ago in our John chapters where she was like, "You have to come with me." So, like in the linear sense, like it hasn't been like 6 months or anything, right?
Oh no! So if they might have had sex 50 times in a very short.
They could have had sex 50 times in like a week. It seems like I don't know. John's got that stamina, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, she could be super pregnant. She just wouldn't know yet, right? I mean,
yeah.
Got at least a month or so before it's like obvious.
Yeah, it just struck me. I was just surprised when he says half 100 times. I was like, oh, okay. So
because
he's a guy.
4 times
so
that
he's,
first day.
He's exaggerating. They've done it 5 times.
So it's in like 3 days.
Yeah, but if this encounter's any indication, he talks about how they did it, and then he's like, okay, never again. I've done it, and 2 more times that evening, like. And
then once the next morning, so it's 4 times that.
Once
day.
When she woke up and saw his morning wood, you're like, oh, okay, like dang.
But I'm looking at the linear timeline. It's been at least 3 weeks since they started. So like by the time they get beyond the wall, it's going to be a month. So
yeah. So if
they
notice
were like
if she
was
lucky
pregnant.
that first time, right?
Yeah,
that's possible.
And I repeat, either of them could be barren. It would probably be John if he is, Rhaegar's son.
Or just
all that inbreeding.
Yeah.
Why would? Oh, okay. I was like, why would it be John? Yeah.
Because we're women and we hate men, Adam.
have the Targs like even like I don't know. They don't really have a history of that, but I guess there's a fair amount of inbreeding and. Yeah, I don't know. Some of them come out perfectly fine. It's very weird.
Yeah, but the ones who come out fine are not.
It's
like.
I don't remember if it was like this chapter
even
or the next.
Rhaegar's a little touched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even like the Wildlings have a really good system against inbreeding, and they're like, you don't even sleep with people in your own village. you have to steal a woman from a different village or else that won't work.
He mentions,
could you imagine if it's one family and they keep stealing women from from villages? Like, so it's like one generation steals
it just goes
from
back and
one
forth.
Village. Yeah, that's they're all related.
Yeah, it would still happen. Well, like the closest village is like 5 days away, other than the one that's right next door. But I think because he asked like about Long Spear Rick, I think is what it is, right?
Yeah, because she's like, ooh,
she's like,
no,
oh, that's like
he's
my brother.
He's like
oh
my brother.
gosh.
He's from the same village.
Yeah, like we live in the same place.
John's still into it, so sorry.
Ugh.
Sorry. All the bad jokes are going to come out this episode because it's like 1 a.m. for me, so I'm like...
You go for it. Make it happen.
Cool. Terrible jokes all the way.
Anything else on this chapter today?
Oh, yeah. I had a bit on the stars that John's looking at. And... Okay. And I was wondering if you guys thought they had any relation to the 7 faces of God by the Faith. So you have the Ice Dragon, Shadowcat, Moon Maid, Sword of the Morning, the King's Crown, who's the cradle with the free folk, the Stallion, who's the Hornlord, the Smith, who appears to be the same, and you have the Red Wanderer, who's the thief with the free folk. The Red Wanderer is supposedly a sacred to their Smith. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I wonder.
Do you want me to? I can go first because I kind of did a bit of a theory or who I thought might be what.
Yeah, go for it. Totally.
Okay, so with the Ice Dragon, it might actually be John, and the Ice Dragon might also be a representation of the Father because the Father's the person who they pray to for justice and to defend someone in battle and the strength to seek justice, wisdom to recognize. So I think that sounds the most like John out of all of the characters we have left. And for the mother, I actually picked that as being the King's Crown or the Cradle, and that'd probably be Dany because she's the mother and Misa and all of that stuff. So still very obvious. The warrior would probably be the Sword of the Morning, and I think that, like, yes, it's a very obvious allusion to the Dane house, but it could also be Jaime or Brienne after his dream in Jaime 6, where their swords actually light up. There's the Smith who is still just the Smith, and that's either like Tyrion or Gendry, and Tyrion because the Smith is meant to be the mender of broken things who puts the world of men to right, and Tyrion's the one who's always going around trying to fix broken people or helping people and building things most of the time, or it could be Gendry because he is literally a Smith. You have the maid who is the Moon Maid, and that's probably Sansa, who's innocent and people pray to the maid to keep young women safe and to guard their innocence. And then the crone, I actually think the crone's probably the Red Wanderer, who's more than likely Melisandre. And that's an old wise and wise woman whose statues often show her with a raised lamp in one hand, and people pray to her for wisdom and guidance. And then you have the stranger who might actually just be the shadow cat. So I think that's probably Arya, because her being the cat of the canals and being no one, so very similar to a shadow in that sense. And that just fits with neither being male or female, and is an outcast and wanders from place to place. And his face is the face of death. Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, but which one of them teaches John the Lord's Kiss?
Well, that's apparently the father and the ice dragon, because it does happen in an ice cave. So, well, not an ice cave, but a very cold cave. None of them teach him the Lord's Kiss. Oh,
well, I do like it. I like the analogies. I like the links. It's good. Well done.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it necessarily makes sense, but I think it's interesting to think about, because why would you put all of that in? Then and
isn't there a theory also that the faces of the 7 are also the 7 Starks?
Probably because they'd all fit one.
Yeah, the idea is that they it's Ned, Cat, the 4 legit children, and John, and that each one takes a different one of the characters of the 7.
And of course, John is the stranger.
No, that is Arya.
That's Arya, because she's a faceless man.
Yeah, but he's the bastard.
That's just what Catelyn wants it to be.
Yeah.
She's like, I would prefer he not come around here.
Exactly.
Wait, then who would the mother be and who would the crone be?
Can we make old Nan the crone?
Yes.
I guess, I don't know. I mean,
the mother could potentially still also be Sansa as she becomes wiser and more politically strong, and the crone could potentially be Lady Stoneheart, but we have to see what happens to her, I guess. Or maybe she's the stranger because she's a stranger from herself and symbolizes death. I mean, I think these things are hard to do, aren't they? It's just because there's a 7 and a 7.
mean, 7s are just like, I mean, in literature in general, like 3s and 7s and like they're kind of good numbers. But especially in this, like there's so much to do with, Faith of the 7, and like 7 comes up a lot. I mean, like what was the last reread or one before that we were talking about Barrack? I was trying to figure out, I'm like, do his deaths correlate with the 7 somehow?
Which one is the better and which one is the correct?
A couple of them I'm like, that makes sense. It didn't so much.
Yeah, and also the 7 are supposed to be the 7 faces of one god, and so you can find aspects of different gods in the same person, like with, for example, Catelyn and Lady Stoneheart. She could be the mother or the crone or the stranger.
Exactly. And in reality, the characters are way too nuanced to sort of fit easily into these.
It's all intertwined.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it would take a much more simplistic approach to the writing to make it just kind of fit in there well.
Yeah, and I think with almost all of them, they've gone through different phases where they'd fit more into one of the gods, but then as they go through life, it changes a lot anyway. So you can't really say that one of them fits any of them.
What does Bran fit apart from the tree?
A man is a tree.
What does Rickon fit?
Yeah.
He's the king in the north, so.
Rickon fit the crazy one, so.
Absolutely. Cool.
Anyway.
Back to the chapter. Anything else on the chapter before we move on? I mean, I think it's one of the more straightforward ones, in fairness. Bunch of rumpy-pumpy, a little bit of guilt, not enough to stop the rumpy-pumpy. Move forward.
Yeah.
That's basically my chapter.
This is where the whole thing about her wanting them to stay in the cave comes from, and just like let's never leave. Let's just be together. And this comes up a lot for Jon later on,
and it's very tragic. Very sad.
Yeah.
Poor Ygritte.
Yeah.
I cry every time I read the chapter where she dies.
Aww.
So I'm looking forward to that yet another time.
I haven't reread that in so long now because we've been doing this. It's probably been like a year and a half or so. So there are some chapters I'm not looking forward to. That's a rough one.
Yeah. So after Jon, we move forward 4 chapters and 40 pages in my addition to Jon 4. The events take place the next day on the 2nd of December 299. And I think it's Alexi doing the summary.
Yep. Jon and the Wildlings leave the cave and Ghost has disappeared. Jon hopes that he has gone to Castle Black, but he doesn't really know. As they approach the wall, which looms along the southern horizon, the Magnar, whose men are quite scared of the wall as they have never seen it before, and to them it is the end of the world, sends 2 men to the hills to watch for any Night's Watchmen, and Jarl and his men go to climb the wall. We learn that in the hilly area between Castle Black and the Shadow Tower, the wall can be between 900 and 500 feet tall, depending on whether the wall is within a valley or up on the top of a hill. So Jarl finds a spot on a hill where the wall is shorter, with a rocky, wooded slope to climb first to get to it. So at this point, the wall is only 500 feet tall, which is still really high. And then Jarl splits his men into 3 teams of 4, led by himself. I think it's Griggs, and then Irok, so they start. Jarl first goes up a tree and then onto the wall, so he has a head start, and they keep working over the course of the day. There's a large ice fall at some point, and it kills Jarl and his group. There's just a massive sheet of ice that falls off. Finally, the other 2 groups make it to the top of the wall, and they unfurl a long rope, 5 long rope ladders, and they unfurl a small rope down and pull up the 5 rope ladders, and the rest of the Wildlings climb up. 2 Thenns still die climbing, but Jon and Ygritte make it to the top, but Ygritte is crying when they reach the top. She says, not for fear, but because we never found the Horn of Winter. We opened 100 graves and let all those shades loose in the world, and never found the Horn of Joramun to bring this cold thing down. And I'm done.
Okay, Horn of Joramun theories, go. Who has it currently? Do we believe that the Wildlings didn't find it? And who do you think currently has it, if it exists?
I think
it would be really cool if it was the old irrelevant horn that they find at the Fist and that Sam currently has, I think, because nobody would suspect that, and I think it's really cool. But I don't think they found it because Mance was being really kind of, you don't know if I have it, kind of trying to play with smoke and mirrors to keep the mystery, but Ygritte doesn't really have a reason to lie. And I feel like she's being honest when she's saying they didn't find it, because she's just been through 500 feet of rope ladder. She's kind of exhausted.
Yeah. By the way, in meters, like 500 feet is about 150 meters. So everyone who uses the metric system, there you go.
Whoa. Don't bring metric into this. American Tolkien.
No. Not happening, bro. And the average height of the wall is 800 feet, so that's 245 meters. There you go.
And I guess, yeah, I always forget until we get to this chapter, like, because, like the imagery we get of the wall, like in the art and on the show and everything else is just kind of like, it's a flat-lined wall, the top is flat. You just think like, oh, it's just kind of built across like a nice stretch of land. But yeah, there are hills and valleys and parts where it's a lot shorter,
Yep.
We just don't ever see those.
Can I talk for a moment about the realisticness of George's description of ice climbing?
Yeah, do it.
All right, so I think George did some research. He did pretty well. I think he got a little bit confused between rock climbing and ice climbing. So they have hemp rope, which works, and then he talks about queer boots of supple doe skin, which I think would be more. He's trying to make it seem like rock climbing shoes, which would be more what you would need to climb rock, but because they're just climbing ice, you would just want hard-soled boots. He's described crampons pretty well with spikes on the shoes, mostly iron. Some have, and then with stone head hammers and antler ice axes. So that works as well. And then iron stakes to put into the ice, and then at some point Jarl there's a crack in the ice, a cleft, and he puts something in the crack, which is again more of a rock climbing thing, because you don't put anything in a crack in the ice, because that extend the crack when you're ice climbing. But in general, the main problem is that they're in groups of 4 and they're climbing together, which is called simul climbing, which you wouldn't really do on like a sheer ice face. You would have 2 people together and one person would climb while the other person would wait at a ledge and like belay them, and then they would stop and belay the other person up. You would only really do the simul climbing on like more of just a slope where you could fall and stop yourself. And then finally the some of the stone and like they run out of iron stakes to put into the ice, and they just have like stone and bone. When you're ice climbing, it's like modern day ice tools to rest into the ice, like turn and screw, and the inside, like they're hollow, so the ice can come out the middle. So I think smashing like a bone ice stake would be almost impossible, but it's good for trying. I think generally the fact that the wall is 500 feet tall is a little bit. I think George said once that he like went to the Game of Thrones set and he saw the 700 feet and was like, whoa, that seems a bit much. So I think if you say the wall is maybe.
Yeah, he's admitted it's too tall.
Yeah,
really,
he overshot that.
So I think if you say the wall is 300 to 400 feet, maybe about 300 feet normally, in this spot's maybe like 250 feet. Maybe that would be a more realistic thing that you could climb. It would still take most of the day, especially if it's ice climbing. But if it's not completely vertical and there's some ledges and formations, it's within the realm of possibility that some of these old guys, some of these guys who were really determined even with this kind of archaic gear, could possibly get to the top.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. That's really good to know.
So you've done ice climbing. Like, what's like how tall is that normally?
Oh, well, it depends a lot. Like, so you can either go be like mountaineering in like where it's more of a slope and it's kind of a mix of snow and ice, and then that's where you would be simul climbing with. So you're just connected to a rope to multiple people and you're climbing all at once. So that you can be in a chute of snow and ice that's 2,000 feet long. It just depends where it is. But for like straight vertical ice climbing, it's they're going to be either a waterfall or they're going to be man-made. So they're going to be in a little canyon, and then there's some pipes that'll spray water over. That usually isn't that tall. So the place I've done ice climbing, it's about like 100 feet tall. It's like a man-made ice park, and there's a few places where there's going to be vertical ice a couple hundred feet, but mostly vertical ice is going to be shorter just because it's limited by it's like a straight waterfall.
Oh, okay. So like they create these walls.
Yeah,
like
just because
they freeze it over with, like, they pour water and freeze it kind of slowly, I guess, as it gets cold.
Yeah, there's like a whole system of pipes, and they just kind of spray water all the time over the edge. Just because the natural ice is often really hard to get to in the winter. So there's this place in Colorado where there's like a little canyon next to a town in Ouray, Colorado, where they just spray water along the whole canyon, and there's just lots of ice along the cliff the whole way, and you can climb it. Yeah, but it's definitely really, he did not describe helmets, which I feel like they could probably makeshift something, because when you ice climb, basically every time you smash in your ice axe, like a whole bunch of ice hits your face, basically, like you're basically pummeled by ice permanently. So they hopefully have some protection, or at least some glasses, because I know the description of it glazing in the sun, I feel like by the end you wouldn't be able to see anything at all.
You're blind, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a friend who went skiing and he had a tiny little scratch in his like ski sunglasses, and which he didn't even notice. And he came back from a week and he was like temporarily snow blinded, and it took like 2 months for his eye to get back to normal. And I was thinking, these guys climbing this sheer ice face in the glinting, glaring sunlight. I mean, I was trying to think back to the show. Did they show them kind of either gauzing up or covering up, or somehow covering their faces in some way? Or
I remember
on the show, I think it was a lot darker. Like it was like cloudy and gloomy.
Yeah.
But
so they just kind of solved it that way.
The show is a little bit less realistic because of, well, they had Jon and Ygritte climbing and then they fell, and they had I forgot that one character's name, but he cut the rope when, like, he was trying to cut the rope while they were hanging on it. And that's just, there's a famous story of a mountaineer in South America, and he's lowering his friend down, and he goes over the top of a cliff, and he's being pulled. It's like the middle of the night. He doesn't know what to do, so he cuts the rope, and he describes it as basically, if you touch the point of a sharp knife against a rope under tension, the rope will basically explode because of the tension on all the fibers. Yeah, it's not like...
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
You don't like
whip back up at him?
Yeah, so in the show, he's like sawing it, which is just not accurate. If you, like, as soon as you press because it's all the fibers are being pulled out, so the knife will just hit each fiber, and it'll just cut right through immediately. So
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Makes so much sense, though, when you know.
Yeah, but so don't...
Yeah, well, that guy on the show was an ass, so...
Yeah.
And they needed him to take a little while to hack through it for,
for tension, yeah.
So that Jon and Ygritte wouldn't die right away.
But the hemp ropes are quite, modern climbing ropes are all, plastic fibers, but old, like before that, they were definitely hemp ropes that people used for mountaineering in the Alps and stuff. So they would have definitely held you if you had fallen. So I think Jarl.
The children used dragon glass rope.
How is that even a thing? How can dragon glass be a rope?
It can't be.
Or if it is, it'd shatter as soon as you put any weight on it or force. It's just like, goodbye.
Crazy balls.
Ladders of dragon glass, maybe. Yeah, there you go. That's why they failed. That's why they lost the war. So. Weapons are too brittle.
Yep.
Anything else in the chapter?
This is actually one of my favorite Jon chapters, and one of the ones that I actually remember the best. And I loved how George wrote it so that the wall's defending itself from the free folk, and you have Ygritte actually says that I almost fell thrice. The wall was trying to shake me off. I could feel it. And I thought that was really interesting. And I'm wondering if that's going to come back with the others, and when they're trying to go through or anything like that, whether the wall will try to fight them off as well.
So do you believe that the wall truly does have magics and does try to do this? Or do you think it's just uneducated wildlings sort of anthropomorphizing the wall and just interpreting what sort of surface melt that's working against them?
Okay. Well, it's more like, I know it probably isn't, but it would be awesome if it did.
If it were. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's me with everything, so I'm more like, it won't be like this. But if it was, that'd be so much better.
But I also like the fact that with George, there are often things that could be natural but could be magics, and he just leaves it that little bit ambiguous. And I like that about his writing.
But
yeah, unknown is often the best.
The wall does have a magic door that opens with a secret password. So...
So you never know.
You never know.
But yeah, I just think it's really interesting that they've decided, well, George has decided to describe the wall this way, at least from the Wildling perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think I was just noticing that, so last chapter we had Jon being conflicted about liking Ygritte, and this chapter he was much more pragmatic in his conflict, I thought, where every time they get close to climbing to the top, or he keeps thinking, I hope there's a patrol, I wish we were still chopping down the trees so that those wildlings couldn't go up. He's really kind of like willing something to go wrong so that they don't get past the wall.
So that he doesn't have to do anything?
So he doesn't have to really, because I feel like for him, going over the wall is really like obvious oath breaking, whereas he could have maybe denied the rest of it, but now like there's no going back once he's over the wall.
Actually, it's totally cowardly, isn't it? A little bit.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to confront the decision that he's made.
But then at the same time, he's also thinking, but if I go back to Castle Black, with Ygritte, because he's come to this point in his thought that he can't leave her behind, so he can't go back to Castle Black with her. He can't desert and just hang around the north because they would both get killed. And he's like, in his escape scenarios, he's really including Ygritte in every single one of them. And that's when he realizes he really has no other choice than to keep going with the Wildlings, because if he deserts now and tries to take Ygritte with him, there's really no other option than to be killed either by the Watch or by the Northmen.
Mm-hmm.
And bear in mind, this is a day after the previous Jon chapter.
Yeah. Well, like the previous chapter, they've had
sex
the wall,
10 more times.
So, yeah.
But he's pretty fickle, isn't he? Let's be fair.
I feel like seeing the wall physically also probably has some impact.
It's making it real, kind of. He's been trying to compartmentalize, and I mean, these are actually some really good chapters. And I think like the coming up Jon chapters, like leading to the assault on Castle Black, are all pretty good. And part of that is because of the conflict, which is somewhat a bit. I mean, I don't know the way George writes it. I mean, it's like he has kind of betrayed his people, and that's how he feels. And he's more and more kind of he starts to like these people. Doesn't want to. He wants everyone to win, right? But he doesn't want to do anything.
And he's still at this stage where he's not completely sure what Corn Halfhand meant when he said ride with the Wildlings and work with them. And he doesn't have a manual of, okay, I have to do this now and then kill Mance at this exact point in time, and I can't have a lover with the Wildlings. It's all very, very fuzzy, and he's kind of making it up as he goes along, and he's 15 or 16? He's never been in a position to make decisions. He's always been either at Winterfell, like his father would give him stuff to do, and at Castle Black he was under Mormont's orders. Now he has to make all these decisions for himself while still trying to decide what he should do with regards to the Watch.
Yeah, and he's had zero training for deep cover work. I mean, he's just not. He's not suited out for this. He's like, he's like a police officer or something who just like accidentally stumbles into a drug deal, and someone's like, "Hey, just kind of hang out with these guys for a while until we get the evidence." And you're like, this was my day off." Like,
but it's a jokey point, but it's a serious point. Like, how long ago did he join the war? I mean, he's not been a Night's Watch brother for very long, has he?
I think it's about 6 months before they.
Yeah, because when he actually joins and says his vows and all that, like we're well into Game of Thrones. The timeline here, like 6 months would seem about right. I'd have to check the actual timeline, but
yeah, I'm gonna try to do that now.
Yeah. Are we all just gonna try to check the timeline and figure it out?
Yeah. The timeline says he was given Longclaw on the 1st of January 299, so about before this. So it's been more than 6 months.
Okay, so he arrives at the wall with Benjen on, according to the linear timeline, on the 10th of June 298, and we're now 2nd of December 299. But when does he actually become like a sworn brother?
When does he take his vows?
Tyrion ready to leave. That's in August 298.
November 298 is when he takes his vows.
Yeah. So really he's at this point, he's over a year in the Night's Watch, actually. That's kind of surprising to me.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I thought it was a lot shorter.
Everything seems to happen like so quickly with the Night's Watch in the story. I mean, it just seems like, because we check in on them sometimes infrequently, so it seems like, well, this happened yesterday, now they're doing this. But I guess sometimes it takes them a little while.
Yeah, especially because like Jon 4's page 400 in my book, so it's very infrequent, at least in the first part of it. And I know in the first 2 books he only gets about 10 chapters in each of them, and in the first one it might actually only be like 7 chapters.
Yeah, he doesn't get much, and if you think about it, we're kind of halfway through Storm of Swords, although we're jumping about. We haven't had much done at all, and then suddenly we're getting these 2 chapters, and in the next part of reread we're going to get a Sam chapter. So we really do lose touch with the wall kind of for the first half of Storm of Swords. We don't get much, because at least in Game of Thrones we had Tyrion kind of going there too, so we had that perspective.
Yeah.
It's almost like Dany. It's very sporadically put through. And I was noticing that when I was doing the prep for next episode's Sam chapter, that he's another one where you skip forward and back a lot of chapters because his story is just sort of scattered through everyone else's.
Yeah, and even like when they retreat from the wall after the White attack, we open with Sam walking through the snow. It's like they've actually been walking for like 2 weeks.
Yep.
So it also takes a very long time to get anywhere north of the wall.
Yeah, and I guess like for a lot of Jon's time after he says his vow and stuff, like time does pass when they keep talking about, oh, you know, Benjamin's been gone a while. Oh, definitely not coming back. Been gone a while before before the Whites show up, and then they decide to go north. I think that happens all pretty quickly once
the Whites
the
show
attack
up
happens.
when he says his vows, right? Because that's where they find the hand in the werewood grove and all that. So it happens pretty quickly after he says his vows.
But then you would think they'd go on that ranging like right away.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? It's like, why don't they leave the Shire straight away? Why do they just hang out for a year?
For 18 years.
Fantasy is like that. I mean, I don't know. But it does seem interesting. I think, is it you, Adam, or is it Greg who always says, you know, really, the Game of Thrones all takes place in the south, but the actual story of A Song of Ice and Fire, the key hinge of the world is the wall, and that's where, you know, the survival of Westeros is going to boil down to.
Yeah.
And yet, actually, like proportionally, you get so few chapters on that until you reach
that's
dance.
really the main stroke of it, and he's got to fill us in with all these houses bickering and wine and gold and, you know, all this like, you know, soap opera drama just to kind of keep us occupied while we're waiting for the real battle, right?
Yeah. And I think that's also part of the beauty of Feast and Dance is that the pace is so slow. You have characters wandering around for months and months, and it's just all taking so much time. All the while, there is a very direct threat looming literally over the realm. And it, like, the characters are just taking ages to get into place to even begin to get ready for that. And I feel like it's one of the...
Well, that's what I mean with Dance being all build up, right? And that we'll judge it better when we get TWOW. And I think, like, from memory, I remember when we did the Feast Dance character episodes, and I think Duncan Valkyros did a really good summary of the Jon chapters in Feast Dance. And he made a great case for the fact that when you read them all together, you get this amazing perspective on everything that's happening in the North, and it just seems so much more important. But it's just drowned and surrounded by all that Dany wandering around kind of stuff, and but we have to get there to judge it again. Yeah, exactly.
And Brienne wandering around.
Have you seen my sister? Yeah, exactly.
Come on, don't be mean to Brienne. We get some great chapters with her.
Chapters.
And Quentin. Oh my God, Quentin. Quentin's alive.
I feel the some of the times that they take to move around in the north beyond the wall seem a bit like they seem quite long, as if the north seems much bigger than it is shown on the maps. Like because it seems like a lot of people still live in the north. You know, even though there's very little to eat, mostly people. I don't know how much farming people actually can do. I almost imagine the north as being a lot bigger, and you know, maybe like wider, because they seem to take forever to move around. And so, you know, in the map it's kind of drawn like pretty small. But if you have that many people living where there's just everyone has to be spread out because there's not much to eat, you have to be a pretty big area.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's like our maps where it distorts the actual sizes of continents.
Yeah, like reverse Mercator, so the stuff looks much smaller than it is.
Yeah, maybe.
I found it very interesting with all of the metal, and George really reinforced in this chapter just how rare metal is north of the wall, because the reward for reaching the top first is a sword made of southern steel, and it seems like almost all of the Wildlings' tools are made of bone or rock rather than metal, and it seems to only be the Thens that have much metal at all, and theirs is all bronze, and it's presumably stuff that the first men had, and it's just been passed down through the generations. So I thought it was really interesting, and I'm wondering if the Wildlings found out about what Jon's sword could actually do to the Whites, what had happened, whether they'd steal his sword or just kill him and keep Longclaw.
Oh, someone would kill him very quickly.
Yeah. It's just like, stab, thanks for the sword, bro. Or they could just be like, I'm keeping your sword,
yeah,
you
like,
can go.
I mean, yeah, I guess because, Mance doesn't want him dead yet, but it is kind of surprising they don't just kill him and take all of his gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even just take all of his gear and then give him some of their stuff. And it's just like, we're keeping your stuff. Here's some wildling.
Oh, yeah, you got to learn to be a real wildling. Here's this bone saw.
Yeah. Here's a spear. Have fun. Bye. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting.
Cool. Shall I move on?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so after Jon 4, we jump forward 14 chapters, or 190 pages in my edition, to Jaime 6. And the events take place on the same day. So I think it's Sarah with a chapter summary.
Okay. So in this chapter, Jaime and Roose Bolton both leave Harrenhal at the same time, and Jaime's group is led by Steelshanks towards King's Landing. Their route actually leads them through the same path that Jaime took after first being made a Kingsguard, and we see him relive a lot of his regrets and shame that stem from being made a Kingsguard. And that night he falls asleep on a weirwood stump and dreams of being abandoned by Tywin and Cersei in the caverns under Casterly Rock. In the dream he has both hands, and he actually finds a sword underwater that when he pulls it up, it lights up, and then Brienne appears in his dream naked, and she's bound, and he slices through all of the chains, and a flaming sword also appears at her hip. And then together they actually face ghosts of Rhaegar and Jaime's Kingsguard brothers, and they actually all have snow armor and on white horses, which I thought was very interesting. After this, Jaime wakes up and he actually gets Steelshanks to race back to Harrenhal, and they reach there about noon, so a lot faster than what it took them to get out. And at Harrenhal, Jaime jumps into the bear pit and saves Brienne from Vargo Hoat, and Steelshanks actually kills the bear with all of the crossbow bolts. And then the last line in the chapter is "I dreamed of you" by Jaime to Brienne, which is why I saved her. So sweet. Okay.
Yeah, you said the last chapter was one of your favourites. This is one of my favourites in the book, partly because it has the kind of the ghostly dream in the run-up to the Red Wedding. It's so good. But yeah, he does something good. It's the start of his redemption.
This is actually one of my favourite chapters, hands down, but the last chapter was one of my favourite Jon chapters.
Ah, okay.
Because it was mainly based on the wolf rather than all of Jon's emotions. So this one's just amazing. I had to be on this one because of it. So yeah.
This is like I'd say like the two big Jaime moments of redemption. It's here where he turns back and he jumps in the bear pit, and then the one in Dance where he burns, or is it in Feast? I'm not sure, but he burns the note that Cersei sends him to come rescue her. I feel like those are the two like the best Jaime moments, the highlights of his redemption arc. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, they're the best.
So did you guys think in the beginning they leave, and it doesn't talk more about the meeting he had with Lord Bolton, but do you think they discussed the Red Wedding at all? And George has just hidden it from us, even with the POV structure? You don't think they've talked about it?
No.
I think the Red Wedding was organized with Tywin, not Jaime.
Yeah. Because
I think that Roose is smart enough to not talk about it at all, and Jaime's been out of things. He knows that. He maybe assumes that Jaime's down with it, or maybe he'll know soon or whatever. But I think it would be very foolish of him to discuss this at this point.
Because I know during the Red Wedding, doesn't Bolton say like Jaime Lannister sends regards, or is it just the Lannister send
a man we assume is Roose Bolton says Jaime Lannister sends his regards, because he says, hey, tell Robb Stark I said hi, like whatever.
Yeah, because in the previous chapter, I think Roose says, give your father my regards, and since he's leaving for the twins, Jaime says, well, give Robb my regards.
And that's just him being kind of a smart ass,
and I feel like I don't know if Jaime kind of realizes there's something wrong with Roose at this point, but during the previous chapter, there's just so many hints that he's going to
Yes.
betray the Starks.
To us. I don't think Jaime has a clue. I think he's gone through this traumatic thing.
But-
He's knackered. I think he's pissed off with Roose. He thinks Roose is beneath him. But I don't think he really gets that betrayal's in the offing. I think that whole send your regards thing's just a funny little joke on Roose's part. I don't think Jaime knows about it.
Yeah, and it's also unthinkable kind of what they were doing, so I don't think it would have really crossed Jamie's mind. But I do wonder, yeah, I mean, whenever I read through these again, I'm like, you know, we should, as the reader, I'm like, I should have realized what was happening, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's like,
Definitely.
I mean, certainly Roose is like, well, we're sending you back to King's Landing, and he gives his reasons and stuff, but it's like,
But he also
come on.
mentions the fake Arya that he's going to marry to his son, and like that's a really big clue that the Boltons are at least something together.
Alex, you just cut out. Can you just repeat the last line? That's a really big clue.
That they're in cahoots, really.
But I don't think Bolton's all that bright. I mean, otherwise, why does he go in for the kill of Robb and say that line just to be clever? I mean, surely you want to be a bit more like Tywin and hands off with this stuff, don't you? So
It's just to be clever.
I don't know.
I think it's more spiteful to be like, fuck you, guess what? I found that guy.
yeah.
Screw you.
And it's like, my family hates your family, and so like, oh, by the way, Jaime Lannister, go to hell. You know?
Although I have to say, the thing that shocked me on this chapter, because I think of it as the one where Jaime becomes honourable and goes back to rescue Brienne, who he bizarrely finds quite pretty in it. But actually, this is only the very start of his redemption, and a lot of his attitudes, are very reprehensible to modern ears. So when he's contemplating her fate, Jaime says, a man likes to steal Shanks Bolton, who rapes after battle, isn't sort of specifically malignant in the way that the Brotherhood without banners is.
Right.
Which is true, but that's a low benchmark, and isn't rape of itself by definition just cruel and malignant? I mean, it's...
Yeah.
And then he has this really casual way where he says, well, you know, Brienne's tough and big, she'll survive a few rapes. And you just think, when you read it, it's just like, ugh, Jaime, I love you, but if every part of her is as hard as the rest of her or something, like, she'll do fine, like, whatever. And I think that's more of him trying to convince himself that he doesn't need to do anything. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you guys about. Is it that you think that that's genuinely how he feels about women, and Brienne in particular? Or is it him trying to justify the fact that at that point he's not going to go back with her? He's like, she did this whole bunch of stuff to me, we're separate now, so she'll be okay. Well, she's rough, she can take it, you know.
The important part here, I think, is to remember that he's kind of in transition a little bit. I mean, we see
a big bit, right?
The reason, yeah, but the reason he killed the Mad King, and you know, he's just lost his hand. He's in a vulnerable state, but he's also like, a lot of his bravado and stuff is an act, right? Because everyone hates him for what he did, even though it was kind of it was probably the right thing to do. I mean, I think we mostly agree on that. But he's still got like kind of old Jaime and new Jaime, I think, are right in the middle of that transformation, and they're in heavy conflict here. So even at the end, you know, she comes and he saves her, and she's like, why did you come? He's like, you know, I had a dream. I dreamt of you. Whatever, no big deal. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think he dreamt of that lightsaber. He's like, is it here? I need a new sword. But
he's kind of like reluctant to take responsibility for anything, isn't he? He's like, I'm not the Kingslayer. I'm not as bad as you guys think, and I'm also not as honourable as you think. I'm just muddling through in some way.
Yeah, he's like, can I just like be like off the radar? Why does anyone even pay attention to me? Jeez, I'm only like on the Kingsguard.
Yeah, I just want to be alone in a room with my sister. Exactly.
He's like in the middle of emo Jaime transition cocoon.
But I do like it because he is caught in that pull, isn't he? He just wants to go back to King's Landing because that's a real woman, not this weird Brienne. But at the end of the day, he can't pull himself away from her, which I admire.
You know, I think it's very interesting that I think he is just keeping up the bravado to himself and saying, she'll be fine. And then after he dreams of her and her really helping him and them being together, then he's like, no, she's not fine. I need to go back and save her. And I kind of wonder if that's because in his dream she is chained, and whether he feels that he needs to go back because of that.
Yeah.
I mean, the dream isn't new information for him, right? Like, it's just his subconscious being like, what are you doing? Like, you know what they're going to do to her. Like, go do something about it.
Yeah, and it also shows him that, like, if he were in that situation, she would be helping him and kind of reminding him of what she's already done to save him. And just, like, in his dream being like fighting off these ghosts or whatever together is what makes him realize that like, she would do the same for him, so he has to go back.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliantly, can we just stop for a moment and admire the writing, the ghostly, spooky dream writing? I'd forgotten how beautifully this dream was written.
It's
George is at his best
the
when
best
he does
dream.
spooky stuff and horrific stuff. He just excels at that.
He should be a
Agreed.
horror writer.
He is kind of a horror writer, isn't he? Some of his other books.
But more than epic fantasy, just do like horror stories.
Like
would
pure
be
Stephen
great.
King style horror, yeah.
I'm still waiting for Cthulhu to come out of the sea.
Yeah, shit's going to go down in TWOW that's going to be horrific, I feel.
Yay.
Can I ask some questions on Qyburn? Because we get a little bit more Qyburn here, and he's obviously going to develop into someone evil and insignificant. I thought it was ironic that Jamie's like, you can stitch me back a hand. And I was like, yeah, because with Sir Robert Strong, he probably could give you a Frankenstein hand. He mentions Marwyn. Is this the first Marwyn mention we get in the books?
Isn't there I don't know if I
Might be.
Is there a theory that Murray Mazder is new Marwyn? Isn't that a theory as well? And there's like kind of a mention of
I
it
think,
back.
Wait, what?
yes,
No
I think she does
way.
mention him. That
Oh,
Mir
I
Misdur
thought you
studied
meant-
with Marwyn.
Oh, I thought you meant new NEW, like she's the new Marwyn. I was like, what?
Oh no.
No.
Yeah, like that she had studied with him at some point.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, I just
Yeah,
thought
she
you
says
said that
that.
Mary Mazdur had been reincarnated as well. Oh, my
Oh,
God.
no.
Or like he was over there as a faceless man.
I was just literally typing in Reddit, Miri Mazdur is Marwyn theories. I've been reading these books too long.
Everything's a theory now.
Honestly, it's terrible. Is this in Twin Peaks to return? Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to sort of mention is that sometimes with linear rereads you get little echoes or themes that come out. And I thought that it was quite interesting that in John 3 he talks a lot about having no identity because he's neither Crow nor Wildling and not really a proper Stark. He's not really a proper Warg. And I think in the Jamie chapter we have a little bit of that where, he says he's wearing the armour of a dead house. And the quote is, he would be no one's cousin, no one's enemy, no one's sworn sword, in sum, no one. And I thought that kind of interesting that you have these two main characters who kind of are losing their identity. Either they want to or they don't want to, but kind of some of the advantages of having a narrator who's on the margins, you can sort of look a bit neutrally at what's going on. I like that, these sort of identity crises. That's really nice. Nice little echo.
Yeah, and then
It is.
so when it is kind of beautifully ironic though when Bolton's says he has found fake Arya, even when he was with Arya for so long as her cupbearer. I kind of had forgotten that I thought they had found fake Arya later, and then I also realized, does this get talked about much? But that like Arya in some way did cause the Red Wedding, because without her, the Bolton would never been released from prison at Harrenhal, and I assume that's been talked about before.
Huh? What? Yeah, no, it hasn't. So tell us, explain.
Well, because, Arya has the weasel soup, right, in Harrenhal, releasing the Northern Lords, one of which is Bolton. If she didn't do that, right, the Northern Lords would still be there, Bolton would still be in prison, and he would...
Bolton wasn't one of the lords that were imprisoned. He just showed up the next day because he was in the area.
He sent them. It was all kind of planned anyway. I think she just accelerated the timeline there.
Yeah. Okay. I must have been mistaken there. Well then,
because if you read through that chapter, there's some very clear signs that these prisoners, there's a lot of them, and there's way more of them, than really the guards are going to be able to handle, and they kind of don't really seem to need help so much. And they're like a bit surprised when they're being sprung, like at the timing, I think, but not necessarily that they're getting out.
Okay, well that's nice, because for a long time I thought Arya had kind of caused the Red Wedding, but if that's not true, that makes me feel better.
Oh, she probably did somehow. I mean, everyone caused the Red Wedding a little bit, right?
That's true, yeah. But it is ironic that
the reader especially.
And I always, on those chapters when Arya was the cup for Lord Bolton, like why she, I always thought, oh, just say that you're Arya Stark and everything will be better. But then you're even Arya just has this kind of creepy idea, like Lord Bolton is just so creepy that she doesn't even want to reveal it to him, which finally
she's like, these leeches make me cautious.
So
and
I guess
probably rightfully so.
It is really fortunate that she didn't, because then she would just become real Arya in the stead of fake Arya, which would be really bad.
Do you think that maybe if she had revealed it early enough, or with the people she frees, like I don't know, maybe that wouldn't have been so bad.
Maybe.
Because Arya in the later ones with Roose is actually going, I just need someone else, anyone else who's a noble lord, and I'll tell them. Anyone else who's one of Rob's bannermen, it's just Roose that she doesn't trust. And I think that is because she knows about the history between House Bolton and House Stark and how they've always been warring factions within the North.
Yeah, good question. I don't know. Maybe not. Probably not, right?
Can we circle back to the whole Qyburn giving Jaime a new hand thing?
Mm-hmm.
Is there like fan fiction? Why has that not happened? Can that happen in TWoW maybe?
Yeah, why
And then,
not?
like his hand like is a murderer hand, you know, and control it,
But
and it chokes
Whose hand
Cersei.
would
Oh
it
no!
be?
Oh, that's a good
Like,
question.
whose hand would they cut off and give to him? That's the question.
One of the Kettle Blacks.
Should cut off Vargo Oates and give it to him.
But is it like, could Qyburn only really give like a dead person a hand, not really a live person a hand, maybe? Because like the Mound's already dead, so maybe you have to be dead for him to like start the jinxes. Well, he's deader than Jaime.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people think like the verdict's out in the mountain, and maybe it is, but I still feel like, you know, whether or not it's his head or not is still up for question. So I don't know.
We should probably just spend a minute talking about how disgusting Vargo Hoat is, and the fact that he has the women that he rapes checked for venereal disease before he does so. What an absolute git. I also misspoke and said he was Brotherhood without banners, but of course he's not his brave companions. Sorry.
So do we know where the brave companions? I mean, they're from Essos, right? But like, did we know who they fought for? Or that, you know, if I was a, you know, leader of one of the free cities, I feel like I would never hire the brave companions. You know, I feel like they're pretty unreliable and kind of just a bit like they seem like the worst of all the free companies. And
well, Tywin just wanted cannon fodder for the Riverlands, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed like he sent out like pretty quickly. They needed that, and he probably just bought what he could get right away. Like, we don't get the timeline, but they've been in it since pretty early.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not even necessarily from cohort, are they? They're a total mixed bag of randos. And they're not meant to be as kind of like, there's a snobbery within the mercenary bands of who are the sort of really old ones and who are the new Johnny come latelys, and these guys are meant to be sort of new-ish, right?
Yeah, and their name sucks.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like a band that's like, all the good names were taken, so this one sounds like super cool. We're Brave Companions, and they're like, no, you're not.
Honestly, though, they're not
ambitious.
even that brave, though. So how can you call yourself the brave companions if you're going to be like that?
Like, sellswords in general tend to not be super brave, right? We see that there are certain companies that have much better reputations, but for the most part, they like getting signed on as just like kind of the win more portion of the army, so that like, yeah, we're just gonna have a sweeping victory with little casualties. Like, none of them really want to sign on to the side that's outnumbered 10-1.
Unless you're the Golden Company.
Yeah, there's with exceptions.
Yeah.
Maybe the brave companions in some like were founded a while ago, and they were originally quite good, and maybe they were brave and originally, but because they've just kind of fallen into decay over the years, and finally Vargo Hoat has become the leader and decayed it to the point of like
hostile
absurdity.
takeover.
Yeah,
the controlling interest from the original noble founder.
Yeah,
probably not, but maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Possibly.
Anything else in the chapter?
Yes. I think it's really funny that Jaime actually, when he's leaving, he goes up to some of the brave companions and is just like, fuck you bitches, I'll be back. And those ones are actually Pig Timian and Shagwell, who Brienne fights them and they actually kill Nibbledick Crab. And then Rorge as well, who she fights later on, and that's the guy who bites the chunk out of her cheek, and she kills all of them. So the only one to know about is Zolo. And I'm like, I thought that was really funny. I was like, you're saying you'll be back, but it's really Brienne who gets them all. It's okay though.
Yeah,
no,
it's
awesome.
Obviously he sent her. You know, it was.
Yeah.
It was by his word.
Indeed.
And I also have a point with Jaime's dream about Brienne and Jaime both having the swords that light up. I actually think it's really interesting because if Jaime gets Widow's Wail and Brienne has Oathkeeper, they're both forged from ice. So it would make sense if they both lit up because they're from the same sword. So
yeah, and it's a beautiful,
I thought that was interesting.
Beautiful kind of a metaphor for how they're growing closer as characters as well. They have two parts of the same sword.
Two parts of the same whole. Okay.
Oh. I so want them to get together in the end. I'm going to be so sad if they don't.
Or like, I'd settle for one of them sacrificing themselves for the other one and dying on a battlefield.
Yeah, that's also okay. Like, if Jaime
because that way you know that they loved each other. It's like, oh,
they die back to back. I don't think we're ever going to get Jaime just being like, run away with me or anything like
Oh,
that.
no, I don't think they'll end up, sort of getting jiggy with it or anything like that. But just as you said, like a romantic death scene on a battlefield or, just a mutual acknowledgement that they mean something to each other would really please
like
me.
maybe like, like he's dying or she's dying or something happens and you probably get from him like, hey, in a different world, you were my sister.
Thank you, Adam, for ruining that beautiful moment.
What do you think would have happened if Steelshanks and his men hadn't intervened with the bear? Would Jaime and Brienne both be dead?
Yeah.
Because it kind of looks like it.
100%.
Yeah, dead Jaime.
That would have been Brienne and Jaime dying back to back, basically.
Yeah, basically. Would have been a bit...
I would have been so annoyed.
Yeah, and there's this moment where I think he's talking to Vargo, or is it Steelshanks, where like his internal monologue says once he would have smiled and replied with a threat, and he actually just does that. He's like, well, it's when he's talking to Steelshanks to go back. He's like, if you don't let me go back, I'll just tell my father you kept my hand.
Yep.
So even though he spends all this time thinking about how losing his hand has changed him, he still acts exactly the same.
I actually think it has changed him, because otherwise he wouldn't be thinking about that's what he'd say and then say it.
Yeah, definitely.
That'd just come out straight away.
I feel like his confidence is still there, no matter what he thinks.
By the way, that line is the total Draco Malfoy. My father will hear about this.
It's so true. Fantastic.
I thought the Steelshanks is quite a little bit of an interesting character, as you think of Bolton as being so evil, but you think, well, how all his men, are they evil too? And you realize just the fear that must be if you are part of Bolton's company, whether you were at his castle or some of his in his army, because it's like if you mess up, you will be flayed. So you literally can't mess up. Like he has this absolute loyalty because the fear of messing up is beyond measure almost.
Yeah.
But it's actually really interesting because in the Jon chapter, you have him thinking about the Magna of then and how he has absolute control over all of his men because he rules with an iron fist. And I thought that was really interesting with that chapter, because it kind of parallels House Stark and the Lords of House Stark. They hold the utmost respect out of all of their bannermen, apart from the Boltons. But I thought that was interesting. There you go. It would be
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think with that, we'll bring the episode to a close. You can find us on the comment section of our WordPress page, on Instagram, on Twitter, on our Facebook page. Just search for Vassals of Kingsgrave or VOK Podcast. And for those of you who are still, if anyone's out there left listening along and playing along at home, the chapters in the next episode are going to be Tyrion 5, Arya 9, and Sam 2 from A Storm of Swords. We're going to meet Oberyn. We're going to meet House Manwoody. Woohoo! We're going to cross the Trident and Gilly's going to give birth. That's episode 48, and episode 50 is the Red Wedding, so we're getting pretty close now. And it remains for me to thank all of you for listening. I've been Bina007. I want to thank Adam, Alix, Alexi, and Sarah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bina.
Thanks, Bina.